The world will need a new common tongue. A language of nukes.
Hold on. What did he just say?
A language of nukes.
A language of nukes? How's that supposed to work? Anytime I want to say anything, I have to drop a nuke? Is it like one nuke for yes, two nukes for no? Do I drop multiple nukes for a sentence? What about the side of where the nukes are dropping? Is there like a wasteland somewhere that's just a giant crater? Or do I carry around a miniature bomb in my pocket that I use to speak? Sorry, Skullface, but I can tell you right now, that is not gonna work. Metal Gear Solid 5 is the final chapter to the franchise, the game that ties the rest of the series together. Well, it's supposed to, but the ending is just kind of weird.
We'll make diamonds from their ashes.
Yeah, supposedly you can actually do that. Anyways, the story starts in 1975 with Skullface's creatively named XOF force eliminating the original Mother Base. They wipe out MSF's forces and completely destroy the facility. And during the attack, an explosion rocks Big Boss's helicopter, which then collides with another helicopter. Being the awesome guy he is, Big Boss survives, but sustained significant injuries during the event, and in the hospital, his heart actually stops beating. The doctors revive him, but mention that he was out too long, so he's fallen into a coma. Now the reason Snake fell into a coma is because his brain wasn't getting enough oxygen. It's a condition which is called cerebral hypoxia. See, normally the heart pumps blood up to the brain to supply oxygen for it to function. When the oxygen supply to the brain gets interrupted for whatever reason, like traumatic injury, the heart can work harder to supply more blood and oxygen to the brain, but that's only a temporary solution, and the heart can eventually give out from the stress, stopping blood flow to the brain completely. CPR or defibrillation can be used to start the heart again, but additional means may need to be used to restore oxygen flow to the brain. Big Boss's resulting coma can be a double-edged sword to him. A coma can give the brain the opportunity to heal and regenerate, but typically, the longer a coma lasts, the longer it'll last. Basically, if someone's been in a coma for a long time, generally, they'll never wake up. And even if they do, the damage done to the brain usually prevents any kind of normal function. So let's roll up a phantom cigar and fast forward to when Big Boss rouses from his oxygen deprivation-caused sleep. 9 years later, he wakes up, and within the first 2 weeks he's awake, he has to escape the hospital that's cared for him for so long because a lady tried to assassinate him and some dude on fire is burning the entire place down. Understandably so, when first rising from his bed, he falls.
Drug's not working.
Then he crawls, and then he falls.
We're getting out of here. Move it.
Then he crawls, and then he falls.
This isn't gonna work.
Yeah, it's pretty annoying playing that part. But you see, the fact that he can rise at all is pretty amazing. Oftentimes, when patients are in long-term comas, they have to relearn things they knew because of the damage to their brains. The muscles in their body have been inactive for a long time, and in Snake's case, 9 years. The muscles need to relearn how to do regular activities, like getting dressed or bathing oneself. Even understanding speech, let alone talking, can be very difficult. The fact that after 9 years in a coma, Snake can stand, run, shoot, and drive from the passenger side of a vehicle speaks immensely about the physical condition he was in. Plus, Kojima needed a way to pad out the timeline. So with the help of Ocelot, Snake escapes the hospital and makes his return to Mother Base. But this isn't the old Mother Base that burned down 9 years ago. Instead, it's a new base run by Diamond Dogs, the spiritual successor to MSF. Now, the Diamond Dogs organization was created by Big Boss and Miller as a private military force. As the name implies, the force is self-managed instead of being run by a state or nation. Instead of taking action based on the needs of a country, clients approach Diamond Dogs with jobs that are either accepted or declined. If accepted and completed, payment is either money or materials. Now, this process is directly inspired from real-life PMCs. There are numerous private militaries in business in the real world, and jobs offered to them include logistics, maintenance, security, and training of local militaries. The mission list in Metal Gear Solid 5 includes some of these options, but the combat deployments contain a lot more variety than the mission list. Now, once a mission or contract has been selected, the operative, or in the game's case, Snake, gets deployed into the area of operations. His first jobs take him into Afghanistan, which in 1984 was in the middle of a rebellion against the Soviet Union. The rebellion started because the communist government of Afghanistan tried to forcibly change the traditional way of life in Afghanistan, which was met with fierce resistance. Instead of trying to work with the people or show them why communism was better, the government decided to just imprison and even kill dissenters. So understandably, the people rose up in rebellion, and the government lost control of large parts of the country. The Afghan leader asked for Soviet assistance with the rebellion numerous times, finally getting armed forces sent to quell the rebellion. And what's the first thing the Soviets do? They flew into Kabul, killed the leader of the government, and installed a new one. The superpower-backed Red Army then led the fight against the scattered groups of rebels. It seemed the conflict would end with a Soviet victory rather quickly, but instead it dragged on for 10 long years until the Soviet Union finally withdrew. And for that reason, the conflict is sometimes described as the Soviet Union's Vietnam War. Snake's time in Afghanistan is right around the peak of the war. His area of operations is northern Kabul, which was completely occupied by Soviet forces. The roads have numerous checkpoints and the villages are all occupied by Soviet soldiers. The approach the Soviets took towards pacifying the rebels could be described as a scorched earth approach. They would try to intimidate the populace by first bombing villages, which would cause the people to flee. On the march towards villages, the Soviets would destroy farmland, kill livestock, and lay down mines to hinder the rebels. Once they reached a village, they would imprison any remaining villagers and torture them for information. Once they got what they needed, they'd just kill them. Yeah, pretty ruthless. Any rebel fighters or sneaky people skulking around their base that were met were eliminated with extreme prejudice. The entire unit would be called on to fight the rebels, and equipment such as mortars and turrets were used in the fighting. If the fighting was getting rough, the Soviets would call for reinforcements or air support to help eliminate the rebels. Now, the rebels couldn't win up front against the Soviets, as the Soviets had better training, manpower, and weaponry than the rebels. So the rebels resorted to guerrilla warfare, which is similar to how Snake operates. They would show up, fight for a little bit, then disappear. Now, since the rebels were fighting the Soviet Union during the Cold War, they of course received aid from the West, including the United States. The US would send money and weapons to the rebels to assist in their war against the Soviets. Now, one such weapon they supplied was the Stinger missile, which in Metal Gear Solid 5 is called the Honeybee or Killer Bee missile. The missile could lock on to the Soviet gunships and blast them out of the sky, removing a huge advantage the Soviets had. Now, just as Snake gets comfortable with operating in the desert, his contracts take him to the highlands of the Angola-Zaire border region. Some of his contracts take him to oil fields and diamond mines, and Angola actually has both resources in abundant supply, which brings in millions of dollars a year. Now, since both resources are highly valued, control over these resources were fought over in 1984 because, guess what? Angola was in the middle of a civil war. After Angola achieved independence from Portugal in 1974, a government was created by three Angolan parties, the MPLA, UNITA, and FNLA. The government was weak and soon disintegrated. And with assistance from the Soviet Union and Cuba, the MPLA gained control over most of the country. UNITA wanted control for itself and rebelled against MPLA control, and since it was opposing MPLA, and therefore the Soviet Union, it received aid from countries like South Africa and the United States. Makes UNITA sound like the good guys, right? Well, both sides have actually come under scrutiny for human rights violations. Both sides are accused of crimes such as the imprisonment of foreign nationals, use of mercenaries, destruction of villages, slaughter of civilians, and conscription of child soldiers. This last topic is a hot issue, and instead of avoiding it or briefly mentioning it, the game actually shows child soldiers and the damage that occurs when they are forced into such a violent lifestyle. These children are forced by adults to become soldiers, and from a young age are taught how to use a gun. Oftentimes, they are among the adults, fighting on the front line, taking aim at others, and getting shot themselves. Some of them don't make it. Death is difficult for adults to deal with, and these are kids. They look death in the face every day. The children become desensitized to violence and distrust adults. Those that survive often have post-traumatic stress disorder and depressive issues. Many have thoughts of suicide. This tragedy goes on in the world today, and many groups, such as UNICEF and the World Health Organization, rescue these children from these conflict zones. Although I don't think they do it with a balloon. However, even after being rescued, these children need help to be reintegrated back into society.
To learn how to read and write, do basic jobs.
Chance at a real life. Just not from behind a gun.
It isn't enough to take the gun out of their hands, as the only thing they've ever learned how to do is fight. Schools help former child soldiers develop skills in business or trade, so they have economic opportunities when they grow up. And counseling is provided to improve mental health. Without this crucial step, the former soldiers will just fall back on what they've always known: violence, hatred, and warfare. They may join different militia groups, form a criminal gang, or steal a bipedal robot tank from a military base in the middle of the ocean. I would say Metal Gear Solid 5 is unique in the franchise as it seems more based in reality. The franchise has always sort of been critical of war, what with the nuke problem every game seems to have, but this game is different. Instead of talking about a war economy tearing up the world or soldiers having their genes modified to become the perfect soldier, Metal Gear Solid 5 actually shows you what war does to people. Villages are destroyed and the population slaughtered. People are taken prisoner and ordered to be executed. And even when removed from combat, people still carry psychological scars. Hopefully, someday, we'll see a world that the boss hoped for. Not one under total control or one free of any control, but one in which people respect each other as human beings, instead of hating each other for their differences. I think that vision is something we can all work towards. Sorry to end it on such a corny sentence. Thank you for watching and see you later. Alright, so a little while ago, I won a contest.
A little while ago.
Yeah. And it's finally here.